مجمع الأندلس التعليمي، تعلم عصري ملهم بهوية وطنية وقيم إسلامية.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear students of grade 10, Mr. Aymen is back. Still in the same unit, unit 3, a new lesson, a grammar lesson about comparatives and superlatives. Have a look on these pictures that may help you to understand or to remember what is a comparative and what is a superlative. Or before that, let's define our objectives for this lesson. You'll need your student's book, page 40, and the grammar reference in page 80 and 81. We aim to learn to form and use comparatives and superlatives of some adjectives and adverbs. Our second objective for today is to answer questions about comparatives and superlatives. We aim at the end to complete sentences using comparatives and superlatives. So, open your student's book on page 40, and as I said, we will need the grammar reference, page 80 and 81. Yes, I'm hearing a question from Ali. You don't even know what is a comparative and what is a superlative? Never mind, let's discover it all together. Comparatives and superlatives. Let's first know when do we use comparatives and superlatives. We use them to compare two or more people or things. Like these two dogs. Yes, here comes the second dog. What can you notice? What can you say about these two dogs? Bigger than, smaller than, maybe faster than, and things like that. Yes, you have a second question? Yes, Ali, what is your question? How do we structure comparatives? Here is the answer. You need a verb, of course, after a subject, and then the comparative adjective, and then. I think you may need an example. Here is one example. John is taller than Harry. Just have a look on or at this picture. John is taller than Harry. What about superlatives? You want to know how to structure superlatives? Again, we need the verb, of course, after a subject. The article the, then we put the superlative adjective, and that's it. Now then, the broccoli is the healthiest food here, means that it is healthier than all the other foods. None of the other foods is healthier than the broccoli. And this is what a superlative means. Yes, Ali. That was not your question? So what is your question? How do we form the comparatives and superlatives? I thought you know that, so I told you how to form sentences using comparatives and superlatives. Don't worry, you'll get the answers. All the answers for any question you need. Just have a look on this table. Words ending in E, words ending in consonant, and the vowel and the consonant. Of course, we have also to set the rules for two syllables ending in Y, and at the last step, 2 or more syllables. Just pause the video and try to detect or to extract the rules. Otherwise, adjectives like cold and dark will just take an ER at the end to get the comparative and an EST to get the superlative. So cold, colder than, and the coldest. Adjectives ending in E like cute and fine will just take an R to get the comparative and an ST to get the superlative. And we will say, for example, cuter than and the cutest. Adjectives ending in a succession of a consonant, a vowel, and a consonant like big and hot will need to double the last consonant and add ER for the comparative and double the consonant and add EST to get the superlative. And we will talk about bigger than and the biggest. Adjectives ending in Y like happy and sunny need to have the Y deleted or erased, and next we need an ER. And we will talk about happier as an adjective, and of course we will replace the Y with an I, and we will add EST to get the superlative. And so Selim will be happier than Ahmed, and actually he's the happiest. We don't need to add any suffix to adjectives made up of 2 or more syllables to get the comparatives and superlatives, but we need to use the word more before the adjective to get the comparative and most to get the superlative. So it will be more frozen and the most frozen. Most or least. But mister, I think this is not always true. What are you talking about? I think they are called irregular comparatives and superlative. Do you know some examples, Ya Jasem? Yes. You said better and the best. That's for good. What about bad? Worse and the worst? You know also another one? Yes, Radi? Farther or further than and the furthest or the farthest? Great. And here the examples you mentioned. Good, we say better than and the best. When we talk about something bad, we say something is worse than something, and the second thing is the worst. And if we talk about distances, we will say farther than or further than, and the farthest and the furthest. Let's take some examples with complete sentences and situations. So here is this Mary, which is older than Petey. Hello Petey, how are you? A second example? Let's wait for it. Are you coming or not? Here is a cow, I think. Maybe it is faster, taller. So cows are bigger than chickens and birds. But these are faster, probably. I think now we have to go to your grammar reference to ensure that we know all the rules related to comparatives and superlatives. Ready? So, the first thing to know is that adjectives describes nouns, like short to describe a person, tall also, and the same with the adjective smart. Ali is smart. Whereas adverbs of manner describe how something happens, means they describe the verb, like strongly, smartly, quickly. He runs quickly. And we form most adverbs of manner by adding ly to the adjective. So we say quite, the adjective, and that verb is quietly. Carefully is the adverb derived from careful. If the adjective end in y, we drop the y and we add ily. Like easy, easily. And we get adverbs from adjectives ending in le by dropping the e and adding a y, like in terrible, terribly. Of course, there are many irregular adverbs, like well, which is the matching adverb with good and not goodly. Fast is the same as an adjective and an adverb. The same applies with hard, late, and early. Note that these are used to describe one particular thing or one particular action. Of course, we talk about adjectives to describe nouns and adverbs to describe actions and states. But the question will be, what if we want to speak about two persons or actions? Here we need to compare, and here we will need comparatives and superlatives, and not adjectives and adverbs. Here are some rules related to comparatives and superlatives. We use the comparative of certain adjectives and adverbs when we compare two people, animals, or things. So adjectives and adverbs are usually followed by then, and here are some examples. Jack is better at football than his brother, and living with your family can be easier than living on your own. Here we are talking about comparatives, and to deal with superlatives, you should know that we use the superlative of adjectives and adverbs when we compare one person, animal, or thing with several of the same kind. Adjectives and adverbs always take the definite article the and are usually followed by the preposition of or in, even if it is not written, but it is known from the context. That's the most interesting book I've ever read. Means the most interesting book of all the other books I have ever read. Or my brother drives the most carefully of all of us. Radi, again you have another question? How to get these? How to form these? I think you didn't concentrate with the previous explanation and information introduced just before this part. So you need to follow us and to concentrate. Be ready. So to get the comparatives and superlatives from one syllable or also from most two-syllable adjectives, we add er for the comparative and est for the superlative. So from short we get shorter and the shortest. From happy, happier, and the happiest. From big, bigger, and the biggest. Note that we doubled the last consonant. We get the superlatives from adjectives with 3 or more syllables and some 2-syllable adjectives by adding more before the adjective to get the comparative, or most to get the superlative. Also, of course, we can use less and least. So interesting, more interesting, and the most interesting. Note also that all 1-syllable adverbs end early take ER and EST to get the comparative and the superlative. We use also more and most and less and least before adverbs to get their comparatives and superlatives. For example, carefully, more carefully, and the most carefully. Again, there are some irregular comparatives and superlatives like good and well, like bad and badly, like little, like far, and like many and much. For good and well, the comparative is better and the superlative is the best. Worse is the comparative for both bad and badly, and their appropriate superlative is the worst. We use less and the least as the suitable comparative and superlative for little, farther or further, the farthest or furthest for far, and more and the most for many and much. You should note that some 2-syllable adjectives form comparative and superlative forms in both ways, means adding ER or EST or using more. So we can say cleverer and more clever, and we can say cleverest and the most clever, and both are correct. The same applies with common, so commoner and more common, or commonest and most common, and narrower and more narrow, and narrowest and most narrow, simpler and more simple, simplest and the most simple. We can add more precision if we use words like far, much, rather, a lot, a little, a bit, slightly, and even with some comparatives. Like in the example, this car is much more expensive than the one I bought. So it is not only expensive, but it is much more expensive. The same. The house we live in now is slightly bigger. The difference is not that apparent and obvious than the one we lived in before. Yes, Rashid, I didn't hear your question. You want to know if there are any other forms of comparison? A smart question. So these are some of the forms that you can use to compare between two things. So you can use the form less plus adjective or adverb plus then to show inferiority, like the jumper is less expensive than the shirt, or Terry paints less terribly than his sister. You can use a second form, which is the least, followed by an adjective or an adverb, followed by of or in to show also inferiority, like in, this is the least interesting book in the world. A third form or structure is as associated or followed by an adjective or an adverb and a second as to show similarity. The skirt is as colorful as the shirt and Kevin runs as fast as Scott. An as structure is when we use not, as, or so with an adjective or an adverb and as to show difference. The jumper isn't as expensive as the shirt, or Kevin doesn't run as fast as Scott, or Kevin doesn't run so fast as Scott. Another structure is to use or implies using a comparative and a second comparative to indicate a continual increase or decrease, means an evolution or a change. The car was going faster and faster. We have already talked that you can emphasize a comparative when using words like much, a lot, rather, a little, even, and far. She is much prettier than her friend Sally. Let's watch together this video which uses some forms of comparison. Be ready.
Mike and Kate are 25 years old. Jack is 40. So Mike is as young as Kate. And Jack is not as young as Mike and Kate. To make an equal comparison, we use the formula as, adjective as. For example, Mike is as young as Kate, or its negative variant, not as, adjective as. Jack is not as young as Mike and Kate. Mike and Kate are much younger than Jack. However, Jack is much more experienced than Mike and Kate. When we talk about big differences, we use the words much, a lot, far before the comparative. For example, Kate and Mike are much younger than Jack. Kate and Mike are a lot younger than Jack. Kate and Mike are far younger than Jack. And one more example with a long adjective, more than 2 syllables. Jack is much more experienced than Mike and Kate. Jack is a lot more experienced than Mike and Kate. Jack is far more experienced than Mike and Kate. When we talk about small differences, we use the words a little bit, slightly, plus the comparative. For example, John is a little younger than Mike. John is a bit younger than Mike. John is slightly younger than Mike. And one more example with a long adjective. Jack is a bit more experienced than Mike and Kate. Jack is a little bit more experienced than Mike and Kate. Jack is slightly more experienced than Mike and Kate.
And now we need your student's book. Page 40, task A, the grammar part, of course. Someone to read the instruction? Read the examples below. Which of the words in blue is an adjective and describes a noun, and which is an adverb of manner and describes how something happens, means describes the verb. Someone to read the sentences. Mr. Rashid has a large collection of very loud cats, and my history teacher speaks loudly so we can all hear him. Read the instruction for B and try to answer both questions A and B. Someone to read the instruction? Read the examples and answer the questions. Ali, please, can you read the sentences which contain comparatives or forms used to compare between actions or things? The journey lasted longer than we expected. I think that ancient history is more interesting than modern history. The day we visited Babylon was the hottest day on the month. And the most difficult part of the trip was when we ran out of water. Someone to read the questions. Yes, please, Radhi. How are the comparatives and superlatives of one-syllable adjectives and adverbs formed? And how are the comparatives and superlatives of multi-syllable adjectives and adverbs formed? And which form is used to compare two people, things, or actions? And which form is used to compare one person, thing, or action with several of the same kind? Pause the video, have a look on your student's book, and answer task A and B. Ready? So, yes, your answers should be the same as Jason's answer, which are... Yes, Jason, please read your answers. So, the word loud is an adjective and describes the noun cats. And the word loudly is an adverb of manner and describes the verb or how something is done. Loud cats, and my teacher speaks loudly. Great. So, which or how are the comparatives and superlatives of one-syllable adjectives and adverbs formed? Great, by adding ER to get the comparative, and by adding EST, or actually the, plus the adjective or the adverb and EST to get the superlative. Your example is longer than and the hottest. Great. And how are the comparatives and superlatives of multi-syllable adjectives and adverbs formed? The comparatives and superlatives of multi-syllable adjectives and adverbs are formed with more, followed by the adjective or the adverb, followed by then to compare, and if it is a superlative, we need the most and the adjective or the adverb, like in more interesting than and the most difficult. We want also to know which form is used to compare two people or things, and we said that it is the comparative form which is used here, whereas the superlative form is used to compare one person with several of the same kind. The last question is to focus on the two examples and answer the related questions. Someone to read the examples? In my opinion, traveling by train is as tiring as traveling by car. And it was raining this morning, but now the weather is getting better and better. So what does as adjective as mean? It is used to express a similarity, means the same as, and the form better and better indicate a continual change or an evolution. Excellent, a great job. Here we are at the end, just to let you know that you are brave men. The same grammar lesson is given to students of grade 11, so if you have a brother or a friend, just show your strength Here is a second example. You can benefit of the sentences here. If you want to practice with some games, here is a list of some games. And here we are at the end. See you so soon. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
مجمع الأندلس التعليمي، تعلم عصري ملهم بهوية وطنية وقيم إسلامية.